As discussed in my previous reviews, Ico and Shadow of the Colossus were games that were recommended by many as proof that video games are an art form. The developers at Team Ico decided to loosely reuse concepts from those two games to make The Last Guardian, a game that would be released for the PlayStation 3. Instead, development moved to the PlayStation 4, where the artistic vision could potentially be fully realized under the formation of a new company. But it unfortunately led to the game being delayed for approximately 10 years until its release in December 2016. Was it worth the wait? Is it an artistic triumph of a video game? The story is not really that complex, but is still packed with emotion. The player controls a nameless boy who wakes up near a giant creature that is a hybrid of different animals, such as birds and cats. At first, this creature, whom the boy names Trico, is hostile, but gradually accepts the boy when it's unchained, nourished, and healed in the aftermath of what appears to be a battle involving spears. The boy and Trico gradually form an intense friendship as they try to escape, with puzzles and guards getting in the way. Part of the backstory is somewhat cryptic and open to interpretation. Thanks to the design through subtraction, or subtracting design approach, it is purely all about the central concept of the bond between these two characters, which is loosely borrowed from Ico, the two characters escaping together while overcoming puzzles in combat, and Shadow of the Colossus, a human and animal being a duo, as well as a climbable giant creature. The game is not necessarily a rehash and is thankfully unique, yet the setting and variety of landscapes such as castle walls, cliff sides, mountains and so on feels similar. What is also similar to before is how beautiful the graphics are. The creature, Trico, looks especially amazing, with the feathers and fur being textured to seemingly near perfection. The landscapes look lovely, and the lighting, animation and particle effects are nice. Look at the haziness and dust and colourful insects. Add to all this a musical score that, while not necessarily as strong as that of Shadow of the Colossus, is exceptionally well composed and is used sparingly to emphasize solitude and silence, as well as raise adrenaline in the action sequences. The big problem, however, is the technical performance of the game. The game's frame rate can slow down almost to a grinding halt, which is apparently not the case on a better PlayStation 4 system that is surely compatible with a higher resolution television. This game, for all we know, could have functioned better on the PlayStation 3. Before analysing whether the gameplay stands up, let's talk about the creature Trico. Drawing comparisons to Ico and Shadow of the Colossus, Trico is a companion as well as a giant climbable creature. As well as the impressive graphics, the way Trico moves and reacts and shows emotion is simply amazing, and is probably a good reason as to why this game was somewhat hard to develop. While you can call Trico and give commands to it, it can move around and do things of its own accord. It expresses emotions ranging from happiness to sadness to anger, and it will make a variety of sounds, such as wailing when the boy moves further away.
Are you kidding?
There are objects throughout which it will react to with either curiosity or fear or both, and you will have to move these things accordingly to progress. Progress can also be made by holding up a strange reflective mirror to an object, which will lead to it being broken by a bright laser projectile shot from Trico's tail. You will also have to feed Trico, treat battle wounds by removing spears, plus you can strike it calmly and the boy makes a gently heartfelt noise when doing this. On top of this, Trico has its own intelligence and stubbornness, like a wild animal or even a pet you don't necessarily have complete control over. The lead game designer, who is interested in animals, was actually inspired by the game Lemmings, because of how alive the title animals looked and moved on their own. This certainly is a deliberate decision from the developers to strive for realism, but it has its share of problems. Trico not responding to your commands and calls can test your patience. And Trico's key ability to jump or fly up to outer reach areas with the boy hanging on is inconsistent. It seems hard to tell whether you have to order Trico to move up to said area or whether it will just do it by itself for the sake of progression. You'll probably have a love-hate relationship with Trico, or at least grow to love it the more you play. For all its stubbornness and the testing of your patience, by the end of your playthrough, Trico may become your best friend ever. That can't be said for the camera and controls, unfortunately. Camera and control issues have been prevalent from Ico to The Last Guardian, and unfortunately, for the most part, they are inexcusably bad in this 2016 game. The camera is more stubborn than even Trico. Trying to move the camera around to get an idea of where you should be heading to is restrictive, to the point where the game will move the camera for you to angles that are not exactly helpful. It is especially worse in smaller areas where Trico's giant size means you can't necessarily see anything. The obstructions actually almost make it look like it cut to a different angle, much like how editing works in a film or television show, which adds insult to injury. The controls aren't as bad due to their simple placement and generally helpful on-screen prompts, but they almost feel like they're from an older game. The controls are under and oversensitive, and sometimes even the boy will do something else instead of, say, picking up an object that you need. When climbing Trico, you may also get stuck or not move in the direction you want. Add to all this the fact that it's sometimes hard to tell what's climbable when reading the environments, let alone moving around them, and you've got an exercise in frustration. The puzzles are generally well designed, but some may not make sense, especially if you give a command to Trico and it doesn't respond, causing you to reanalyze the situation. It is possible to get random hints in the form of narration from the boy telling the game's story, generally framed as a flashback. Alongside the puzzles, you have to avoid guards who will carry the boy kicking and screaming to an ominous void behind a door if you're not careful. These encounters feel more frustrating than the puzzles, due to the fact that you generally have to find a pathway for Trico to come destroy the guards. If you have to pull a lever to open a gate, then you better have time to do so, otherwise you'll get caught. The only way to break free from the guard before it carries you to the aforementioned door is to press a variety of buttons on your controller that are represented by ghostly symbols that appear on screen. These symbols, while seemingly relevant to the art direction and story, are really a confusing inclusion. They seem unnecessary, especially when you have to press them to load the game, usually from a checkpoint after a game over. To all of these very noticeable flaws really detract from the subtracting design approach that is supposed to make the game feel more like a film. Is it hard to excuse the game's 10-year development cycle when we have what feels like a somewhat outdated game despite its interesting core concept and nice artsy production values and minimalistic story? Is it an artistic game that feels out of place in what is quite possibly becoming a more artistic gaming scene, contributed to by independent gaming developers who strive for quality games that are separate from the generally action-packed mainstream titles? Is it similar to Ico and Shadow of the Colossus, in that it's quite possibly trying to be a work of art at the cost of the gameplay yet again? These questions are hard to answer because it's really down to whether you find the idea appealing, especially if you've already played the previous two games Team Ico developed. In contrast to those, the length of The Last Guardian is surprisingly longer, mostly due to scenes where you think you've reached the end goal only to find there's more. You may adjust to, or at least not find problems with the controls, frame rate and so on, to the point where you may be better off experiencing the game for yourself, while mostly ignoring any criticisms cited in this review. In fact, that is essentially my recommendation for The Last Guardian. There are breathtaking environments and memorable moments where the bond that the boy and Trico form leads to them helping each other in some of the most emotional and spectacular sequences ever seen in a contemporary video game. It is worth giving the game and its central core concept a try, or play it from start to finish at least once. Just be prepared for a beautiful, interesting, unique, and maybe even memorable, yet very frustrating experience.